welcome to London's Guildhall, where in the next half an hour we will find out who has won one of the world's most famous and important literary prizes, the Man Booker. It's been quite a journey to get to this point. 156 books were considered. The judges whittled them down to a long list of 13, a short list of 6, and tonight there will be one book left, just one winner. This is one of the highlights of the literary calendar. 500 people are here this evening, and among them the 6 authors shortlisted for the prize this year, waiting, one would imagine, nervously to find out if they've won. Because for any writer, winning this prize is a career-defining moment. This is a prize that changes lives, and who knows, perhaps they're even beginning to think about the £50,000 prize that goes with it. We've also got a royal guest this evening. Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cornwall, arriving here at the Guildhall just a little earlier. She's already been giving the authors specially bound copies of their books, and she will be presenting the winner with his or her trophy this evening. Well, to help guide us through the proceedings, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Sarah Churchwell, Professor of Public Humanities and American Literature at the University of London and a former judge of this prize. Hi, Sarah. And Robbie Millen, the literary editor of the Times newspaper. Lots to discuss, really looking forward to it. But before we do, let's remind you who is on this year's shortlist.
This year, the 6 nominees are The Fisherman by Chigozie Obioma. It's his first novel and tells the tale of a Nigerian family and how a prophecy sets off a tragic chain of events. A Little Life by the American writer Hanya Yanagihara. The novel follows 4 male friends whose lives are haunted by the past. Satin Island by the British author Tom McCarthy is about a corporate anthropologist contemplating the way we live now. The Jamaican-born writer Marlon James's A Brief History of 7 Killings tells the story through an array of voices of the attempted assassination of Bob Marley. The American writer Anne Tyler's 20th novel, A Spool of Blue Thread, is a drama about one family over 8 decades. And Sunjeev Sahota's The Year of the Runaways follows a group of Indian migrants who make their way to Britain in search of a better life.
Those are the books, 6 very different books. I was certainly struck by how diverse the shortlist is this year, both in terms of the subjects covered, but also the nationalities and backgrounds of the writer. Sarah Churchwell, how strong a list did you think it was this year?
I think it is a very strong list. There is no book in this list that I thought that's really a travesty. That book has no business on a Man Booker shortlist. And that's saying something, because there are a lot of lists where one does feel that way. You know, the judging panel is an art, not a science. It's an imperfect process. And so often one does feel that way. But I do think, I mean, you know, I have my favourites in the list, but I do think it's a very strong list.
OK, we'll come on to your favourites in a moment. Robbie, what do you make of it? Because the judges have described it as rather grim.
It's certainly short on jokes. I mean, yes, there's diversity there, but it's quite interesting. There's no comic novels, no historical fiction. There is a lot of violence in them for sure. I mean, the Marlon James is particularly violent, but I think it's quite a strong list. For my money, there's one dud on that list that shouldn't have been there, but there's 2, I think, really outstanding novels on there too.
Okay,
so it's a balanced list.
That's a good cue then to go through the list for us to find your dud. I'm looking forward to finding which one. Yes, exactly. So let's start with A Spool of Blue Thread. This is Anne Tyler's 20th novel. She's probably the most familiar writer on the shortlist. American, of course, at the age of 73, the elder statesman or woman on the list. And like so many of her other books, this is a family drama set in Baltimore. What did you think of it, Sarah?
Well, it's what Anne Tyler does best, and it's not to everybody's taste. Some people think it's small because it's a story of families, and it is. It's not epic. It's not, you know, there's not huge amounts of drama or violence. There's very little violence. The violence is mostly emotional. But she understands families, and she writes so beautifully. And what it sets out to do, it does in this kind of wonderfully exquisite way. And I think it's worth noting for people who know that she's a popular writer, she's also a much garlanded American writer at home. She has won multiple massive American awards. She's won the Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Award, all of our biggest prizes, which are the equivalent, dare I say, of the Booker Prize, at least from our point of view. She's won all of those, and so I think that there are many people who would feel that she has very much earned her place on this list in her career, and I certainly don't think anybody would say that this book lets her down.
A career spanning 50 years, of course. Robbie, what did you think of it?
This, for me, was one of the outstanding books. I think she's really superb at capturing the way people talk to each other in families. There's a really warm, gentle wit to it. Everyone I know who's read it has really enjoyed it. I think this could be a very popular winner.
And sorry, just to say quickly, it shifts ground. You think you know where you are with it. It doesn't do anything so crude as a plot twist.
Yes.
But it starts to subtly pull the ground out from under you, and you thought you knew what this family and what this story was going to be about, and it starts to overturn your expectations in, I think, a really, really clever and delightful way.
Yeah, she really drives down and sort of excavates into a family history.
Into memory and history,
Well, from the oldest writer on the shortlist, let's move to the youngest, Chigozie Obioma. He's only 28, been shortlisted for his debut novel, The Fisherman, and it's set in a small town in western Nigeria where he grew up with his 11 siblings, and it's about a family torn apart by a terrible prophecy. Sarah, how big an achievement did you think this was for a debut novel?
Oh, as a debut novel, it's an extraordinary achievement. I've read many worse debut novels in my time, believe me. And it's very, very accomplished. You would be very surprised, I think, on picking this book up, to know that this was his first novel. We've had, in the last few years, we've had a fairly strong showing from books like this that are kind of fables of modern life, parables. I think of Jim Crace's Harvest or Kom Toy-Bean's Last Testament of Mary, both from 2 years ago. And I think this very much takes its place in that kind of tradition. It's a recognizably realistic modern story, but it has this very strong sense of a moral fable driving through it.
Robbie, I admired this book, I enjoyed this book, but I'm not sure how much I loved it in the end. What about you?
I think it was certainly an interesting novel. I liked what he was doing, but it didn't have enough kind of emotional power for me. I mean, I liked the notion of this kind of madman making a prophecy, and in those bits of the book it really came to life and was very interesting. But then ultimately, I didn't quite care enough about the family itself. But it was very promising, and if this is his first novel, then I think we'll be seeing a lot more.
Yeah,
reading a lot
a name to watch out for, and as I say, only 28 years old. Let's move on to the other American on the shortlist, and in some ways,
sorry, other American woman.
The other American woman,
sorry,
I should say. Yes, thank you for saying that, Sarah. And this is the book, in some ways, that's been generating all the noise.
Definitely.
A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Now, she is the bookmaker's favourite. This is a doorstep of a novel, isn't it? A very intense saga about 4 male friends and the child abuse that one of them has suffered. When you get to the end of its 720 odd pages, Sarah, has it been worth it?
That's a tough question. I promised myself that I would not be negative about any of these books, and I think that because they've all achieved something really great, and I don't want to come up here and be captious about them. What Yanagihara has achieved here is really quite something, and I have said before that it's a book that works almost in spite of itself. It shouldn't work as well as it does. In the end, is it worth it? Just. But for me, it was a tight call, and I did feel personally like I felt about many books this year. Actually, it's a year of long books that many of them would have benefited from losing a third, and they just would have been tighter and more powerful, not less.
Robbie, I know this book made you cry. Was that from joy or despair?
It was joy. I have to say,
It's an extraordinary achievement.
Well, I approached it with deep skepticism because it had a lot of hype attached to it. It's awfully long, and you kind of think, do I want to spend a week reading this book? But I was gripped from the beginning. I think it's unusual because there are not many novels about male friendship. She ladles on the terrible things that happen, double amputations, car. But I think the heightened feelings, I thought it was superb. And it did make me cry at least 3 times.
Oh, at least 3 times?
At least 3 times. I'm soppy.
I wonder whether Tom McCarthy's Satin Island made you cry. This is his 4th novel. He's the only author this year who's been shortlisted before, and this is an avant-garde tale about an anthropologist contemplating the way we live now. Did it please you, Robbie, or did it puzzle you?
Well, this is my dud. I think it's
Not worried about being negative.
It was full of sort of symbolism, but I don't think it much sort of signified anything. I was really disappointed by it. There's very little plot, there's very little character development. It's just a bit, to me, it was rather soothish.
Well, the formal proceedings are about to get going behind me, but we're going to carry on chatting just for a little bit more. What about you? I mean, as Robbie says, there is very little plot.
But it doesn't set out to be a story of plot. It's a novel of ideas. That's what it is. And so I think you have to judge it on those terms. I think it's very interesting ideas. I actually wished, having just complained that the books were too long, this is one that I think should have gone on longer. I think it could have done more with its ideas if it had carried on a little bit further. But I think it's a very, very interesting book. It's a very interesting book.
Then we move on to Sunjeev Sahota, the other British writer on the shortlist this year. He's 34. His book, The Year of the Runaways, well, couldn't be more timely in terms of recent headlines, could it? It's about 4 Indian migrants who come to Britain and the harsh realities of their lives. Did you enjoy it, Robbie?
I thought it was a very good, solid read. It did make me sort of think about Indian immigrant communities in this country, the kind of people you see when you go to a curry house or something like that. So there's got a real depth to it. So I think it's a good, strong novel. I'd be very happy if it won.
Sarah, what did you think of it?
Well, I agree. I think it humanizes stories that we see in the newspapers every day, and we think we're sympathetic to them, but this gives you all their backstory and all their depth and all of their complexity and all of the importance of just remembering. And that's, to me, the great thing that the novel uniquely does is foster empathy, create those senses of identification with other human beings and remind us that that's who they are. And I think it does that extremely well.
Yes, I think the empathy word is a very good one to use about this novel.
6th book on the shortlist, last but not least, A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. I have to say, I absolutely love this book. Did it blow your socks off as well?
It's a very extraordinary book. It's the only book I would use words like bravura and tour de force about on this list. What he is doing here is both artistically ambitious, intellectually, quite profound, historically important. It is, however, uneven. And so it depends on whether you want to be the kind of judge who votes on the basis of huge ambition, often brilliantly executed, but sometimes unevenly executed, or whether you want to hold out for something that's smaller and more perfectly executed. And I think there's a toss-up there, but there's a lot going for this book.
We should say that this book takes as its starting point the attempted assassination of Bob Marley in 1976, but it's about so much more than that, isn't it, Robbie?
Oh, it's completely, it sort of sprawls everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of characters to follow.
It's like 75 or 80.
75 characters, yeah. And because it's all done through interior monologues, sometimes you can slightly lose the thread. It's very disorientating. Yeah. But I think it's one of those books that you won't forget reading. It's very original.
Yes.
I don't think I've read anything quite like it.
It's a book that makes me think of that word that writers like so much, voice. This is a book that's very much an exercise in different voices. So we get Jamaican patois and we have to get ourselves into it. But you also then flip to an American journalist and a British colonialist, and it's moving among all these voices, and that's why I would use words like bravura to describe it. Technically, it's incredibly adept and difficult and skillful what he does here.
Okay, quick prediction from you both. Robbie, who's going to win?
A Little Life.
Okay, you love that book, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Sarah, what do you think?
I'm teetering between the Marlon James and the Ann Tyler. I ultimately think the judges will come down on the side of something that is, in some senses, less ambitious, but more, as I said a moment ago, more perfectly executed. So I think I'm going to come down on the Tyler. I don't think the Yanagihara will win.
Okay, we shall see. Stay with us, both of you, but thank you for your thoughts and insights. And we're now going to join the chairman of the judges, the writer and academic, Professor Michael Wood.
We are very lucky to have them here, and we're even more lucky to have their books. There's been much comment on the diversity of the shortlist for this year, and it is true that, to put it mildly, the writers have rather different biographies. And their novels take us to very different times and places, to 1970s Jamaica, to 1990s Nigeria, to contemporary New York, to Baltimore through 3 generations, to the Punjab and English Midlands as experienced by recent migrants and exiles, to a London that might seem to belong to tomorrow if it wasn't already here today. But I want to say a word about another kind of diversity. Of course, we do care about the contents of these novels and the lives of the people in them. We wouldn't cherish and admire the books so much if we didn't. But novels, as we, I'm afraid, often forget, are actually written. They're made of words. The words are put together by working writers who have to find those words and to create the voices that will most effectively carry those words to us. Whose voices should they be? How many voices does a novel need? What sort of accent should a voice or voices have? Does it or do they speak in dialect? Or do we all speak in dialect of some sort, the way the character in Molière found himself speaking prose without knowing that was what he was doing? Each of the 6 writers present tonight answers these questions differently. Their narrators sound, in different novels, friendly, knowing, a little aloof. They speak slang, they speak patois, they scatter their English with snatches of other tongues, they remember other books, they retell old stories. And the places and the times I've just evoked, they have to be written too, even and especially if they're historically real in the first place. It's not enough just to mention them, you have to create them. They have to be made up, even if they're real. They have to be invented. As Nabokov said, he had invented Russia and Europe, and now, living on another continent, writing Lolita, had to invent America. The instrument of the inventions that concern us tonight, the instrument is the English language. Or perhaps I should say English languages, Englishes. It is fiction written in English, as we've heard tonight, fiction written in English and written anywhere, that the Man Booker Prize in its current constitution recognizes and promotes. And our 6 finalists have demonstrated, each in his or her own style, most eloquent, haunting, and moving uses of that instrument, the English language. Long, short, violent, tender, magical, harrowing, traditional, experimental, mythical, these artistically diverse works provoked many responses in us, the judges. But the one thought I believe we all had about each of these books was, I didn't know a novelist could do that and get away with it. The winner of the Man Booker Prize, is that okay in terms of timing? The winner of the Man Booker Prize, otherwise I'll sing a couple of songs in my Frank Sinatra imitation. The winner of the prize, the book of this year is Marlon James. The Brief History of the 17th.
So Marlon James makes Man Booker Prize history. He becomes the first Jamaican-born writer to win this prize in its 47 years. He's won it for his novel A Brief History of 7 Killings. It's his 3rd novel, and it takes as its starting point the attempted assassination of Bob Marley in 1976, and then uses that to explore Jamaican politics over 3 decades. There he is, receiving his trophy from Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cornwall.
I was so convinced I wasn't going to win, I didn't write a speech. But I did carry a card. Oh my God, oh, wow. I just met Ben Allfrey, and it just hit me how much of my literary sensibility was shaped by the Man Booker Prize. That the Man Booker Prize is that award you hear about that suddenly increases your library by 13 books. And I remember my great turning point as a writer was when a friend of mine handed me Salman Rushdie's novel Shame. And I had no idea. I remember reading it and being so appalled by it. Because I grew up in a very sort of British colonial, Dickensian, George Eliot, and I love those writers. And the idea that those things are possible in fiction just never occurred to me. But that just added to the sort of Booker sort of mythology. The Booker was that thing you hear about, and it shapes your writing, it shapes your thinking. Nadine Gordimer's novel, being so entranced by Wolf Hall, The Siege of Krishnapur, which I thought I was the only person who read it. It's so surreal. I keep thinking I am going to wake up, or at least fall into a whole barrage of tears, but I'll keep it together. There's so many people I want to thank. Certainly my publishers, One World, Juliet, Novin, Lamorna, who I give a lot of grief. My wonderful agent, Ellen. Ellen, I remember, I'm not an easy writer to like, just to tell you. And I remember the lens that Ellen went through just to get my voice heard, and I'm so grateful to her and to Trident and to my American publishers, Riverhead, Jake and Jen and Jeffrey, and I'm giving everybody their first names. 10 years ago, in fact, almost exactly 10 years ago, I'd given up on writing. I had written a novel and I had deleted it, I destroyed it. And it was a novel that was actually rejected around 70 times. And I figured, clearly I'm not meant to write books. And it wasn't until a writer came to Jamaica, her name was Kaylee Jones, her father wrote From Here to Eternity. And she insisted that I show her this manuscript. And can I tell you, Norton Undelete does not work if you deleted a file 4 years ago. And I remember going through so much lengths to find this novel. I found it on an old laptop in an Outlook Express. That should tell you how old it is. Outbox, and there it was. And she had a lot of faith in me, and she published the novel, and I'm eternally grateful to her and to Johnny Temple of Akashic Books, who published my first novel 10 years ago. If anybody shaped my literary sensibility, it was my dad, which is funny because my dad never read fiction. He was very much off. As far as my father was concerned, everything that needed to be written in English literature was written by Coleridge. And sometimes, if it wasn't Coleridge, it was Shakespeare. And I remember we used to have Shakespeare duels, who can have the longest soliloquy. And he always beat me with Julius Caesar, but I always clobbered him with Othello. Just imagine a father and a son in a Jamaican rum bar shouting out soliloquies. And he, more than anybody, shaped my love of books and my hunger for books. And he's no longer here with us, and I really want to dedicate this award to him and to his memory. This is so sort of ridiculous. I think I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and it didn't happen. I am surrounded by such fantastic novelists and such wonderful novels. I remember yesterday being fully prepared to hate all of them until everybody read, and I go, I can't do that anymore. We talk about diversity, and sometimes I think we just use that as a word to sort of kowtow to political correctness. But one of the things it reinforces is that there are so many ways to tell, let's call it the English language novel. Mervyn Morris, one of our greatest Jamaican poets, has a wonderful book called Is English We Speak In? And that this wonderfully malleable and this wonderfully flexible language can be used and taken in so many different ways. My novel is set in Jamaica, and a huge part of it is inspired by reggae music and by Bob Marley and so on. And the reason why is that the reggae singers, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, were the first to recognize that the voice coming out of our mouths was a legitimate voice for fiction, a legitimate voice for poetry, that the sound of the market woman can speak poetry. And that was, again, a huge influence on this
So
novel.
there you have it, Marlon James, the winner of the 47th Man Booker Prize for Fiction with his novel A Brief History of 7 Killings. Many congratulations to him. He becomes the first Jamaican-born writer to win the prize in its history. From all of us here at the Guildhall, thank you for watching and a very good evening. Goodbye.